With that, let me just say, Madam President, I'm rising in support of my resolution with Senator Cramer and my colleague, Senator Capito, that would overturn the Federal Highway Administration's greenhouse gas reduction rule. We all have a responsibility to the climate. We all are here to do it better. But to be practical about what we're doing, to be sensible. And if it's not feasible, it's not reasonable to go down this path. The rule is another example of the administration trying to implement laws or bills they wanted, but bills they didn't pass. We're saying stay within the confines of the laws we pass. It's an unworkable, one-size-fits-all approach. Burden states with setting and enforcing declining emission standards for travel on highways. It makes absolutely no effort to consider the unique needs of rural states like West Virginia. Let me explain to you what me and my colleague, Senator Capito, where we live, the most beautiful state we consider in the country, with the most beautiful, hardworking people in the country. We all feel that way. We wouldn't be here representing our states. My friend from North Dakota here, Senator Cramer, feels the same about North Dakota. And I agree with everybody, but we're defending it. I have a state where I don't have one city over 50,000 population. So I'm very rural, 1,700,000 plus. And the bottom line is, we don't have high density of emissions. We don't have that. So to make this in the common sense, what they're trying to do is saying that you must, wherever you are now, you must reduce, reduce, reduce. The only way that we can get to where they want us to get to is to quit driving, quit basically transporting, quit delivering our food or all of our necessities of life. Don't go to work. Stay home. It doesn't make any sense at all. For them to go down this and put one size fits all makes no sense. It does not only undermine the very purpose of our highway system, it just isn't feasible in rural areas without other transportation options. Our economy would grind to a halt, and I've always said, if it's not feasible, it's not reasonable. Even if the rule were reasonable, it wouldn't matter because the administration simply does not have the authority to do this. That's what we have to, they do not have the authority. Transportation DOT does not have the authority to do what they're trying to do with this rule. We know this because when we were writing the bipartisan infrastructure law, we debated whether to give them that authority. That was part of the negotiations we were going through. Democrats and Republicans sitting together, should they have that authority? And guess what? Unanimously, we decided against it. It wasn't in their jurisdiction. So nothing in any law in Congress has passed allows this administration or any administration to burden states with these measures in order to advance their radical climate agenda. And I say that because I think the President is getting ill-advised with his climate advisors and taking him down the primrose path. And it's making a lot of people uncomfortable with thinking government's trying to tell me how I'm going to be transported, how I'm going to use what vehicle, what I can buy, and they're trying to bribe me with $7,500. And if that doesn't work, we'll pass a piece of legislation that makes a law to even manufacture gasoline engines. It's crazy, just absolutely crazy. I've always believed in market-driven products. If you give me a good product in a market where I can make a free decision and decide whether I can afford it or not, whether it enhances my life, and it's something that I desire, I'll make the decision. Don't force me with limiting my options. That's all. And when it's changing, when you can do something better and something that gives better quality of opportunities in my life, that'll make the difference. And I can tell you, the American public, the American consumer, and I say this for all women in my family, they were born with a certain gene. They know how to shop. They know how to compare. They know how to make a good deal. And they have something that men don't have. And they have more sense than we have when it comes to buying things and living within your means. So with that, I can tell you, let the market do its job. So I introduced the resolution of disapproval with Senator Cramer and Senator Capito because we know that this power grab is unreasonable, economically irresponsible, and most importantly, unlawful. It would be devastating for the rural communities and transportation industries in West Virginia, North Dakota, and across all of America. I urge my colleagues on both sides of the aisle to join me in supporting this resolution, and I yield back my time. Thank you, Madam President.
Madam President.
The senator from West Virginia.
Thank you. Madam President, I ask unanimous consent that the following senators be able to speak prior to the scheduled roll call vote.
Without objection. Oh, I'm sorry.
Okay. Myself for up to 5 minutes, Senator Carper for up to 10 minutes, and Senator Cramer for up to 7 minutes.
Without objection.
Thank you very much. Madam President, I come here and join my fellow colleague from West Virginia and from North Dakota to offer my strong support of the resolution offered by Senator Cramer of North Dakota. Senator Manchin's covered a lot of this, but I think I want to recover it because I think it's very important. The Federal Highway Administration issued the final rule that we are challenging today without the necessary legal authority from Congress. The rule will force our state departments of transportation and metropolitan planning organizations to develop and set their own declining greenhouse gas emission targets. State DOTs and MPOs are also going to be required to meet their own targets. If they fail to meet their targets or make significant progress towards them, they are required to develop new plans to ensure that they do meet their targets. So Senator Manchin described how difficult a sparsely populated and basically rural area such as West Virginia is going to be very difficult to make measurable difference in our greenhouse emissions from our transportation sector because we are in, we're in pretty good shape as it is right now. The expected outcome of this requirement is that it will force state DOTs and MPOs to use their highway funding for ineffective emissions reduction projects rather than on projects that will improve the safety and efficiency of the roads and bridges. This restriction on the ability of state DOTs to pick the projects that address their community's unique transportation needs is unacceptable. And it runs counter to our agreement for the Bipartisan Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. When we were negotiating that legislation in our committee, we specifically considered giving the Federal Highways Administration the authority to impose a greenhouse gas performance measure and associated targets. But we ultimately rejected that idea. We make the law. We rejected putting this into our established law for very good reasons. My colleagues and I have also warned FHWA multiple times that it really lacks the authority for this rule. In October 2020, in response to the publication of the proposed rule, Senator Cramer and I, along with 25 of our Senate colleagues, sent a letter to FHWA stating that they did not have the authority to issue the proposed greenhouse gas rule. We further reminded FHWA Administrator Batt of that lack of authority at an oversight hearing just last June. Despite our clear communication with FHWA and the fact that this rule violates the carefully negotiated bipartisan agreement in the IIJA, Congress must once again address the Biden administration's regulatory overreach. I would also note that it's not just Congress that has challenged the FHWA's authority to issue a greenhouse gas rule. In two separate legal actions, one in Texas and the other in Kentucky, a total of 22 states with support from adversely impacted industries successfully challenged this greenhouse gas rule. While the states have prevailed over FHWA in federal court, I also believe that Congress has a duty to make clear when a federal agency has clearly exceeded its authority. Therefore, to ensure that there is no ambiguity whatsoever regarding FHWA's authority, I urge my colleagues to support Senator Cramer's resolution, and I thank you, and I yield the floor to my friend from, I think, Delaware, Senator Carper.
The senator from Delaware.
Thank you. I thank the senator from West Virginia, my native state, for yielding to me. We have three senators in the U.S. Senate from West Virginia today. We're all speaking on this proposal by Senator Cramer. But, Madam President, I rise today in opposition to SJ Res 61, a Congressional Review Act resolution that would overturn Federal Highway Administration's greenhouse gas performance rule. This rule is critical to helping the United States meet our climate goals. And I want to start off by laying out the scale of the challenges we face in addressing climate change and the climate crisis. All of us know by now that we are confronted almost daily by signs that our planet is literally on fire. And as the days and weeks pass, the urgency to act only grows stronger. According to the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, the United States just experienced the warmest winter on record. Not one of the warmest winters on record, the warmest winter on record. And last year, 2023, was the world's warmest year on record. Not one of the warmest years on record, but the. It's not a mere coincidence, but an unabated body of evidence that shows our planet continues to grow warmer and warmer. Extreme weather is affecting communities across our nation, from hurricanes to drought to flooding made worse by rising sea levels. Last year, the Environment and Public Works Committee that I'm privileged to lead along with Senator Shelley Moore Capito of West Virginia, held a hearing where we heard firsthand about the negative impacts of extreme heat on our transportation systems and the punishing effect, truly punishing effects it can have on the health of our transportation workforce. And the science is clear that greenhouse gas emissions are having a substantial effect on our changing climate. So where do those emissions come from? Where do they come from? Well, the transportation sector in America is the single largest source of greenhouse gas emissions in the United States. Let me say that again. The transportation sector is the largest single source of greenhouse gas emissions in the United States, accounting for nearly 30% of our emissions economy-wide. The transportation sector is the single largest source of greenhouse gas emissions in the United States. After that, another 28% comes from our power plants, generating electricity, and yet another 25% comes from manufacturing operations like cement plants and like steel mills. This means that the cars, the trucks, the buses driven on our highways every day are a major source of the emissions that are warming this planet that we call home. And that is why the Federal Highway Administration's greenhouse gas performance rule is so important and must be upheld by Congress. It's simply not possible to meet our climate goals without addressing emissions from the transportation sector. For my colleagues who might not be familiar with the Federal Highway Administration's performance measure, I'd like to take a couple of minutes to talk about what the rule actually does, as well as what it does not do. First, the rule provides a framework for states and metropolitan planning organizations to measure the amount of greenhouse gas emissions generated by vehicles on our nation's highways. This rule does so by using long-standing authorities under the National Highway Performance Program, which have existed in statutes since 2012. Under the National Highway Performance Program, the Federal Highway Administration can enact measures to assess the performance of our nation's highways, including for environmental sustainability. The Federal Highway Administration has already enacted performance measures in other areas, including safety and congestion. During negotiations on the bipartisan infrastructure law, some of us wanted to require the Federal Highway Administration to set a greenhouse gas performance measure. That's what we wanted to do. Well, we couldn't get bipartisan agreement to require a greenhouse gas performance measure. The Federal Highway Administration used then the discretionary authority it has had since 2012, for 12 years, to set performance measures related to the environmental sustainability of our highways. In addition to measuring emissions, states must also establish targets for reducing those emissions over time. However, the rule does not take a one-size-fits-all approach. Instead, it gives each state the flexibility to set its own reduction target. Let me say that again. The rule does not take a one-size-fits-all approach. Instead, it gives each state the flexibility to set its own reduction targets. It's also important that our colleagues understand that the greenhouse gas rule does not impose any penalties on states that, for whatever reason, are unable to meet their targets that they have set, not that someone else has set, that they have set. The rule does not require states to transfer highway funding to other modes of transportation or to pay a financial cost if their emissions do not decline in accordance with that state's targets. That means that under this rule, none of our colleagues' states will see a reduction in the highway funding or any change in the way that highway funds are administered in their states. That bears repeating. This means that under this rule, none of our colleagues' states will see a reduction in their highway funding or any change in the way that highway funds are administered in their states. In fact, Congress specifically authorized funding in the bipartisan infrastructure law to help states meet their emission targets. We established a new carbon reduction formula program that provides funding to every state for projects that reduce emissions from transportation. We also provided $7.5 billion, billion with a B, in the bipartisan infrastructure law to build out a national network of electric vehicle charging stations. Our states are far behind from being punished. In fact, they have been provided with historic amounts of funding to address climate change. So in closing, Madam President, let me just say that I believe we have an important choice to make here. Are we going to continue to ignore the significant impact the greenhouse gas emissions are having on our planet? Are we going to take reasonable steps, as the Federal Highway Administration has done with this rulemaking, to address the problem head on? I hope that our colleagues will join me and others in opposing this Congressional Review Act resolution. Let me just close this for another minute, if I could. Madam President, we've got some young people sitting up here. They're pages, we call them pages. And they're nominated by senators from all over the country, Democratic senators, Republican senators. And they come here and they go to school. They haven't graduated from high school yet. They come here and pick up their schoolwork, and usually in high school, and maybe stay for one academic year, and eventually go back home and finish their education, go on to do amazing things. They're just wonderful young people. We're very proud of the ones from Delaware and every other state as well. They have a bright future. They have a bright future. There's also some incredibly scary threats to that future. And one of those is we live on a planet that is growing hotter, growing hotter, growing hotter. And the question is, are we going to do anything about it? And we're trying very hard to do that. The good news is we can do something about it, turn it around, reverse it in ways that create jobs and economic opportunity. We've adopted that legislation in the Inflation Reduction Act, in the Bipartisan Transportation Bill, in a treaty called the Kigali Treaty. We've done a lot. And the key is not just doing those things, but continue to doing those things. Continue to doing those things. And with that, Madam President, I hope that our colleagues will join me in opposing this Congressional Review Act resolution. And I say this as one who oftentimes votes with both my colleagues, our colleagues from West Virginia, on all kinds of issues. This is just one where we don't see eye to eye. And my hope is our colleagues from both sides of the aisle will vote no. Thanks.
President.
The junior senator from North Dakota.
Thank you for the recognition, Madam President. And at the outset, let me say thank you to Senators Manchin and Capito for their passionate support and in their words today in support of this continuing resolution, Congressional Review Act resolution. I also want to thank the chairman of the EPW, the distinguished senator from Delaware, and my friend who, as he just said, we work closely together on lots of things. It's a great committee. It's fun to work on. And again, we just don't see eye to eye on this one, but I just want to offer my respect for the good work that we all do together. Thank you, Senator. You know, Madam President, few things are more frustrating in government than unelected bureaucrats asserting authority they don't have and foisting federal mediocrity on the excellence of states. Shortly, the Senate will take up my bipartisan resolution that overturns the Biden administration's obviously illegal, regardless of how you might feel about the merits, an obviously illegal rule that requires state departments of transportation to measure CO2 tailpipe emissions, then set declining targets for vehicles traveling on the highway systems of their respective states. Now, this rule is wrong on so many levels and has already been overturned by courts in Texas and Kentucky. Now, we, the elected policymakers in our system, have the opportunity to correct course and spare the taxpayers the gross expense of litigating this demonstration of bureaucratic arrogance. When the Environment and Public Works Committee negotiated the highway bill, we considered giving this authority to the Department of Transportation. But after the hearings and the deliberations, the committee chose not to grant such authority to the agency, and we passed the bill out unanimously. And it became the foundation for the broader bipartisan bill known as the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. When the bipartisan gang put their proposal together, they too chose to leave this authority out of the bill. These decisions were not accidental, they were intentional. When we pointed this out during the Department of Transportation's official comment period, the Federal Highway Administration provided a very novel rationale. Get this now. They argued that since Congress was aware of their plans to promulgate this rule and did not explicitly bar it, quote, Congress intended to leave such determinations to, get this now, agency expertise to be handled via regulatory authority, end quote. That's not just arrogance. That is arrogance on steroids. Here's what the late, great Winston Churchill had to say about expertise in government. Quote, nothing would be more fatal than for the government of states to get in the hands of experts. See, expert knowledge is limited knowledge, and the unlimited ignorance of the plain man who knows where it hurts is a safer guide than any rigorous direction of a specialized character. Congress, Madam President, does not leave determinations to agencies. Congress either grants such authority or it does not. And if it does not, the agency does not possess that power. In fact, let me read a couple of lines from the courts who have already ruled on this issue. Quote, if the people through Congress believe that the states should spend the time and money necessary to measure and report greenhouse gas emissions and set declining emission targets, they may do so by amending Section 150 or passing a new law. But an agency cannot make this decision for the people. An agency can only do what the people authorize it to do. And the plain language of Section 150C3 and its related statutory provisions demonstrate the Department of Transportation was not authorized to enact the 2023 rule, end quote. That's Judge James Wesley Hendricks of the U.S. District Court for the Northern District of Texas. Judge Benjamin Beaton of the U.S. District Court for the Western District of Kentucky wrote, quote, if the administrator, referring to the Federal Highway Administrator, if the administrator were allowed to shove national greenhouse gas policy into the mouths of uncooperative state departments of transportation, this would corrupt the separation of sovereigns central to our lasting and vibrant system of federalism. Neither the Constitution nor the Administrative Procedures Act authorizes administrative ventriloquism, end quote. Colleagues, the absence of a prohibition is not a license for the bureaucracy to do whatever it pleases. These court rulings underscore agencies must abide by the law, not invent the authority they desire. Several states have resoundingly rejected this illegal rule. Several state departments of transportation objected to it in writing. And several states joined this litigation, and 50 senators have co-sponsored this Congressional Review Act. Let me just quote a couple of states. The Arizona Department of Transportation, quote, Arizona Department of Transportation disagrees with the justification provided in the NPRM regarding the legal authority for Federal Highway Administration to establish a greenhouse gas emissions performance measure, end quote. The Michigan Department of Transportation writes, MDOT is apprehensive about supporting new measures not explicitly authorized by Congress. Therefore, there is no provision in federal law requiring the Highway Administration to establish a greenhouse gas measure. 20 attorneys general from Montana, Virginia, Georgia, Ohio, and a number of other states wrote, quote, the proposed greenhouse gas measure would be a serious revision of what Congress has written, and Congress has not given the Highway Administration such editorial power, end quote. Madam President, the Biden administration should have never introduced this rule, but now we, the policy-making branch of government, must end it. I urge all of my colleagues to stand up for the Senate and vote for this restoration of Article I powers. Vote yes on this Congressional Review Act resolution. I yield.
Under the previous order, SJ Res 61 is considered read a third time. The question occurs on passage of the joint resolution.